Having worked at both startups and big companies, at big companies, when there's either no equity or very small amounts of equity, or in consulting where you get no equity, you just get bonuses. Um, the bonuses are discretionary, and so it comes down to somebody's opinion of how much you should get. Whereas at a startup or a tech company, when you're given equity, it is what it is, and if it grows, and if it's worth $1 million, $500,000, $5 million down the road, there's no arguing about it. It's yours. And it's really like empowering feeling to be in that position where you truly are issued equity, you have a seat at the table.
I guess I'm including myself in this one, but I have a lot of friends who are looking to land their first full-time job and are trying to find what companies might give them the best experience, what roles might give them the best experience, specifically the compensation structure. Because I've noticed that as new grads, that's something we tend not to have a lot of transparency on. So we kind of just like jump into the water and figure it out instead of knowing what to say and how to research information. So appreciate you being here today. But maybe before we start talking, do you want to quickly introduce yourself for the people listening?
Sure, yeah. Thanks so much for having me on. Really excited to kind of share my insights that I've learned throughout my career. My name is Fahad Zaidi. I'm based here in Calgary. I've worked in consulting as well as software as a service startups for the last 10 to 12 years in Canada, America, as well as England. Very excited to share my thoughts on compensation as well as kind of some key takeaways as to what new grads should be keeping an eye on as they kind of make their decisions when it comes to choosing an employer.
I was hoping you could break that down for us, really, because the basics that I've covered so far include that, hey, there's a salary, there's stock options or like equity, and there's a signing bonus. So those are the three general pieces. Salary makes sense, signing bonus makes sense, but let's talk about equity or stock options and how startups specifically treat that piece.
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head there. It's whether it's a startup or whether it's a big tech company. Yeah, like you said, you get a salary, you get some sort of a signing bonus if you ask for it. So one thing to note is if you don't ask for a signing bonus, the recruiter's not going to go out of their way to be like, hey, by the way, we could also give you more. And then some companies call it restricted stock units, and some companies call it restricted stock options. If you look at 100% of the company's worth, some of that will be allocated to the people that have invested in that company, whether it's institutional or angels that have come in. The huge majority of it will be for the founders, and like the early executives. And then there's a small portion, and this really depends on the company, but there's a small portion called RSUs or RSOs that are just typically reserved for employees. And the way it works is, and again, it's different at every company, but the model that a lot of both really big companies in tech that are still private, as well as some companies that are much more early stage have adopted, and this was pioneered by the folks at Y Combinator, which is there's no real name for it, but it's basically 4 years of equity built up and then a 1 year cliff. So what that means is if you see an offer that says, we're going to give you, 100K of equity, it's 100K over 4 years, and then you can sell it over the course of a year if you want to kind of cash out. And then another thing to look out for when you're signing contracts for employment with equity is making sure you understand the price point that you're getting the equity. So are they giving you equity based on how much the company is worth the day you sign? Are they giving you equity as per their last round of investment, where they kind of secured a large valuation and so forth? And then keeping an eye on, what you and the employer think the company is going to be worth in the future. And so from that perspective, you want to get into companies at a very low valuation, and you want to exit, or have your value or have your stocks realized when the valuation is higher, which can be a little counterintuitive because when you see some press release of a company that says, "Oh, we're worth 10 billion now," that might trigger you to be like, "Oh, I should go work there." But you if the company's worth is 10 billion and their potential is 12 billion, you only have so much room to for you to make money because you're being given equity. What you really want to look for is, the next company or the next set of companies that you think um, are in the tens to hundreds of millions in valuation, and you think, or the employer thinks and can prove to you that they have a chance at getting to $1 billion, $10 billion valuation, or going public where everybody gets a big payday.
A question that came up for me when you said that, hey, take a look at what price they're offering you for for the equity, so price of the each, I guess, stock option at that moment based on the last round. Is there any room for negotiation at all with stock options?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's room for negotiation as to how much you can get, especially when it's a startup. There's a lot less room when it's a more established company, and there's just a standard. We give this much to a first year. We give this much when if you have 5 years experience. We give this much if you stay for the company, stay with the company for this long, and so forth. At a startup, you're probably going to be interviewing with the founder, or someone that doesn't need permission to make decisions above them. And so from that perspective, you will have more room to be able to get more equity. Now you can't negotiate on price because that's the company is valued where it's valued. It just comes down to, are they giving you equity based on what they think they're worth today? Are they giving you equity based on their last round, which might have been a lower valuation, which could be better for you, and so forth. If you can prove to them that you should get more, make a compelling argument, it can definitely be a conversation. Going into those conversations, I would always look at the full compensation picture and then prioritize what you value more than the rest. So let's say your full compensation, it's a random number. Your full first year compensation is 200,000 because it's 125 salary, maybe 50 signing bonus, and then the rest is equity. There might be room in terms of switching some of the salary to equity or switching some of the signing bonus to equity. Um, and that can be a conversational piece, especially when you're talking to a startup, which is smaller.
When you were first offered like equity as a part of your package or your compensation working somewhere, what was that experience like for you? How did you respond to it, and over time, how did it play out for you?
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to talk about it. So the first time it happened, I was definitely just happy to be part of the conversation. Really, it was really nice to see that it's real. And if you work for a startup, not to be cliche, but you do definitely get a seat at the table. And what I really liked and valued about the whole thing is that your equity is your equity. Um, and if you're given 3,000 shares, 5,000 shares, 10,000 shares, they're worth what they're worth when you join. And they're worth what they're worth after 4 years, 5 years. They're worth what they're worth as your valuation goes up, as the company gets better commercially, um, and they're worth what they're worth when the company goes public or gets bought. It's the issuing of equity is definitely discretionary, um, and the issuing of equities definitely comes down to the company's leader strategy, yeah, as to how much they want to give to which people, and typically you get a lot more the earlier employee you are. A lot of times as the company gets bigger, they may not give equity in the future as they're bigger and bigger because they can just win on cash. um, Having worked at both startups and big companies, at big companies, when there's either no equity or very small amounts of equity, or in consulting where you get no equity, you just get bonuses. Um, the bonuses are discretionary, and so it comes down to somebody's opinion of how much you should get. Whereas at a startup or a tech company, when you're given equity, it is what it is, and if it grows, and if it's worth $1 million, $500,000, $5 million down the road, there's no arguing about it. It's yours. And it's really like empowering feeling to be in that position where you truly are issued equity, you have a seat at the table. And so I think, although it's risky to have equity as part of your compensation, it is a very healthy and team oriented approach to just building a team.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I think a lot of what you've said today is super valuable to students in my position or even to new grads, because it's very hard to navigate the space when you have never been in it and you're all just going off by what you can read on the internet. And what always helps more is hearing from people who've been there and done that, and that's what my goal was to do with the pod. So Fahad, I really appreciate you being on the pod and shedding light on this stuff. And hopefully, to those who are listening, this was very valuable. Thank you so much for tuning in to the UPC podcast.